It's 5 o'clock somewhere. Time for the Security Cocktail Hour. I'm Joe, representing North Jersey.
And I'm Adam, representing North Jersey. No, I mean Staten Island. Sorry, excuse me.
You know, I thought I was going to be able to say you remembered where you were this time, but not yet, you know.
Well,
it's okay.
Kind of like it to Arnold Schwarzenegger when he says, I'll be back in every episode, every movie. That's going to be my MO.
All right. Okay, so I got something new for you today. Okay. I have a quiz, but it's an easy quiz, especially for a top flight security practitioner like you. So
okay.
No pressure or anything, okay? All right. What do the following organizations all have in common? Equifax, Yahoo, Target, Uber, Marriott, LinkedIn, and Anthem.
So this is almost like ridiculous, this quiz.
And these are not, and I can tell you it is not all companies that have rejected credit for you. So I'll give you that one.
So this is an easy answer. It's kind of insulting that you asked me this question. They all have 4 characters or more in the names.
All right. Well, that is true, but it was not the answer we're looking for.
Okay. Maybe they've been breached. I mean, that was my second guess.
Okay. Yes. They have all had major breaches, major security breaches.
Okay.
And you know, it's an interesting list. It wasn't until I put it down that I started to realize some things about them. Let's consider these, if you will. You know, look at LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is basically, it's ubiquitous. Remember that term? They're ubiquitous. I mean, everybody uses it. You almost got to use LinkedIn these days.
$6.50 word, isn't that ubiquitous? Because we went through $4.50 on the last episode, $5, maybe $10. I give this a $6.50 credit for a word.
Okay, well, you know, we got inflation, so as time goes on, these prices are going to go up. But you know, so LinkedIn, you can't avoid it. Especially a lot of people have no choice with what's going on these days. And then you got Anthem. Anthem is a health insurance company, of course. And, you know, if you're using Anthem, if you are a customer of Anthem, you're probably getting your insurance through your employer, which means you don't have much of a choice whether or not you're going to do business with this company. Don't you think?
So, you know, this is an interesting concept, right? And this has been posed to me before. Why use a certain site for a certain reason? And I'm like, because it's been breached. And I'm like, well, how do you know the other ones are not going to be breached soon? How do you know the other ones are not going to be currently be breached? And how do you know that the sites that have been breached are not actually better than the sites that haven't been breached because they have their security enhanced and updated and upgraded and watched and monitored? So, you know, it's a chicken and an egg. These are sites you have to use. Equifax, you have no choice. Yahoo,
Equifax, you totally have no choice. They're getting your data whether you like it or not.
Yes.
Totally.
So there's plenty of sites that aggregate, concentrate, do research on you, and you have absolutely no control. But, I mean, like, look at Google, right? Google has everything about you, or Apple has everything about you. It depends on the flavor of the phone that you're using. But you don't know whether or not that there's a threat actor living on there. You might never know. Now, I'm not saying that these organizations refuse to report it, but depending on the level of the company and the sophistication of the company, you know, it's always possible. You know, I used to say to you, you know, there might be. I always assume there's a threat actor on a network. I always assume that. I always assume it, and
even if it's yourself.
Yeah, even if it's myself, I guess I'm an insider threat. But my point I'm making is, you gotta use these sites, but at the same time, you gotta do the best you can to protect yourself and mitigate your risk, and keep an awareness by maybe using other third-party tools that will alert you if your data is compromised. I don't know how that sounds to you.
Oh yeah, well look, I've got another quiz for you.
No.
This one is really hard. This one's easy for me, but you're not going to get this. Okay?
Okay.
Remember back the days of ancient Rome when they had gladiators and stuff?
Sure.
Guys fighting to the death. So, how often were gladiators actually killed in combat? Was it like every match ended in death? Was it, half the time, quarter of the time? What do you think?
I'm going to think that 90%. Now, let's do the power is a power auto rule, whatever it is. 80% of them died, 20% of them survived to the point where that 20% fought each other. So I'm going to say 80% of the time they died.
Okay. It is not exactly known, but 80% is probably way too high. I
Okay.
have seen numbers between one out of every 5 fights or one out of every 10 fights, you would actually have a fatality. You would have someone die.
Oh, okay. But I
Now,
was assuming that eventually that gladiator was going to die.
well, not necessarily.
Not in the first fight, but then they come up against somebody bigger, then somebody bigger, then somebody bigger, and
Possibly.
then they die.
Okay. Well, here's the point. This is why I tried to make this clever analogy. You know, gladiators were expensive to buy, and they did get bought. These guys were slaves. Guys, ladies too. There were women gladiators, but they were slaves. So you had to buy them, and they would spend months training. And training is expensive. Even in those days, these guys were professional athletes. Basically, they trained. And having someone get killed in their first bout on the first 5 minutes that they're on stage, that's not good. That's not very good for your investment. But even more than that, you're going to run out of gladiators real soon. And so we kind of have this thing. Something that I've realized, and looking at this list and looking at the other list, is it's starting to become a matter of, not just you don't know if a place has been breached or what their status is, but my God, who hasn't been breached? Pretty soon it's going to be everyone. It's going to be just something that we have to live with one way or another.
And breach is subjective, right? I mean, in a way, it's not, but a way it is. When you're breaching, you're breached, then obviously you've been breached. But there are times you're breached, and that threat actor decides, all right, there's nothing really good here, or what do I need, or I'm kind of done, or I did it for the thrill of it. You don't know whether or not they've exfiltrated data. Not everybody is sophisticated or aware of they've been breached, data has been exfiltrated or removed from the site, and they close the doors. For example, I'll give you an example. We talk about our neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, young adults, maybe even adults, walk through our neighborhoods and they walk down the streets after 12 a.m. and usually before 5 a.m. and they open the car doors and they see if there's anything in there, if the car doors are unlocked, and they take stuff and they close the car doors usually. You might not know for 6 months you've been breached until you're looking for that screwdriver or your, I don't know, something that you normally don't use. Well, you might never realize that they took something. So, again, breaches, when you say breach, it's about known breaches. It's not about unknown breaches. Is that a
Well,
fair
yes.
statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Guess I should have said let's start by keeping it simple. Let's keep it to known breaches. The number of companies with known breaches is. I personally think pretty soon, as time goes on, unless there's a radical shift in the security landscape, everybody is going to have reported a breach of some sort. And it's like, if we start treating them like, if we say, okay, someone gets breached, that's the death penalty. I'm not going to deal with them anymore. It's like, it's like killing a general every time they lose a battle.
Okay,
You
but
need someone to go in there.
okay, so here's where I'm going to say, yeah, that's a nice thought that if somebody does breach you, there's capital punishment or something like that. Great thing, but guess
Well,
what?
I was not literally talking about capital punishment for people who are breached. Although that would be kind of cool.
Oh no, no, I don't mean. No, I meant the people who did the breach, not the people being breached. But let's talk about that for a second, right? 90. I'm making a non-scientific statement. 98% of the people who are doing the breaching are not within the authoritative area of being arrested or whatever. I mean, didn't those 4 Chinese threat actors violate some? No, it was actually Russians. I'm sorry, Russians. 4 of them, I think, they were identified, and there's a warrant for their arrest. Meanwhile, they're never getting arrested. They're in Russia, where it's kind of
Yeah,
almost legal to breach other countries' infrastructures
yeah,
as long as you don't breach your own.
yeah. That's it. As long as they don't go after Russians. But I mean, look, I'm not even, from your own perspective, the government likes to make headlines and say, "Oh, we're indicting these guys, we're getting these guys, or even we caught these guys," in the rare case that it happened. But from your own perspective, personally, it's like really the justice and punishment aspect of it doesn't matter. Your data is out there. It's about, okay, can you still trust this company? Who are you going to do business with? If it's possible that everyone has been breached, it's kind of the great leveler, you know.
By the way, there's an ICC warrant for Putin, and I don't think it's going to be exercised. Though it has nothing to do with cybersecurity or breaches. My point is that's never going to be exercised on. But yes, you're right. You kind of have no choice, and this kind of happened in the New York City school system, where they were breached. But finally, the New York City Department of Education decided to get rid of their vendor that was providing access to the students' records. But sometimes you have no choice. If your bank is getting breached, what are you going to do? Move all your money to another bank, and then that bank gets breached, and what are you going to do? Move it to another bank? It's
Okay,
almost like an exercise in futility.
okay. Now I'm going to throw something else at you, make things even more interesting. And you kind of alluded to it earlier. So, say you have a company that has had a major breach, major breach. They've been owned big time, and it's been very very public, very big. They've been embarrassed, and they've done all the requisite I don't know, apologies. Maybe they've testified at the green table, in Congress or something. Whatever. There are two schools of thought about how you should treat them. Do they just horribly suck, and you should stay away and not touch them with a 10-foot pole, never go near them again? Or have they been burned and learned their lesson? And now, is it the case that they actually are doing a great job and have absolutely world-class security and a battle-hardened team that knows how to deal with this stuff?
Well,
Your
and
thoughts?
it's very similar to kinetic warfare, right? You want that's why you use special forces. That's why you use specialty teams to do certain things. They're so well trained that the likelihood of the exercise or the attack is not going to be is going to be probably very successful, which is why you use teams that prepare over and over again. And this goes back to organizations' business continuity plans. It goes back to their disaster recovery plans. An organization that constantly does the exercise of going through and testing their plans is most likely going to be an extremely successful organization, as one, they know how to follow the procedures, God forbid something happens. Number two, if the procedure does not work, they know how to update it and fix it. And three, during these exercises, as I don't even want to get into the whole thing about purple teams, some organizations get involved in purple teams, and then the red team that's doing the testing, the pen testing, says, let's stop. I think we found something, and we need to raise the level of urgency to seeing whether or not this is truly a real compromise. And that's a kind of crazy thing when that happens, right?
Yeah. One thing that we should let everyone know, for those who don't know, a pen test or a penetration test is when someone tries to break in and test your defenses. A purple team is an exercise where it's an attack and defend exercise, where you have someone attacking, and then you have defenders too.
I was trying to impress
it's
people.
like a war game. And yeah, Adam, you're right. Sometimes it is really scary when you have the purple team. They call it purple because there's the red team, that's the attackers, the blue team, that's the defenders, just like they use in the military. And they can get scary when you have the blue team discovers something and says, "Ha ha, we caught our adversary. We see something interesting," and then the red team goes, "That wasn't us, guys." you know.
And this actually goes back to like organizations like the Office of Public and Intergovernmental Affairs with the Veterans Association, where their data's gotten compromised in OPM. So this kind of goes round robin, right? There are times when you really have no choice but to use these organizations because they're proprietary. But at the same time, you hope if they do get breached, they've learned a valuable lesson and they increase their defenses and put money towards protecting it. But I guess the fortunate or unfortunate thing is the organizations that drive revenue, where they have clientele that want to ensure that their investment is protected, they're going to force those organizations to take their protection to that next level, which is why sometimes, unfortunately, the organizations that have great revenue flow are going to have better defenses and offenses. I mean, obviously defenses, but sometimes you need to have some offensive capabilities also to thwart off attacks.
Well, yeah, I mean, security costs money. Place needs revenue. They need money to to secure things correctly, and they have to be smart enough and willing enough to spend it. But so, okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
Oh, here we go.
So you're right. You may have a situation where you have a company, even after a breach, especially after a breach, they're doing a good job. They've seen the light. They're experienced, and they're raising their game. They say, we don't ever want to have this happen again. Here's the problem. It's very hard to know where a company stands with that. Very difficult. As a consumer, I mean, as the public, you basically got nothing. What are you going to get from the company? They're going to put up a website. They're going to send some things out. They're going to put out some very carefully worded statements put together by their PR people and their lawyers that basically tries to tell you that everything's okay and this will never happen again, but we're not actually guaranteeing anything, and we're not actually going to tell you anything. Even if you're a business, even if you're someone doing, from a business standpoint, it's really tough to know, to get visibility. One of the hot things in security and risk management now is called third party or vendor risk management, where we go to our vendors and we say, okay, you got access to our data, we're doing business with you. How safe are you? I've done a lot of these, including for businesses that have had breaches, and it's still very much based on trust and based on what they're telling you. There are not many companies, who have vendors, big banks, very big institutions, governments, regulators, that they have the ability to, the capability in terms of the resources and also the leverage to go into a company and really audit them and really test their stuff and see where they are. But for most, not really. And that is a really tough thing to even know what you're dealing with and what your level of risk is.
Yeah. So this kind of leads me to the next thing, right? Because organizations might be either one, lackadaisical in their approach to cybersecurity, or two, don't understand the framework and what they need to do. A lot of municipalities, a lot of local, state, and federal government entities are putting legislation forward or have legislation forward or laws in place that requires you to have certain certain audit points and certain security measures in place. Like for example, the New York State Department of Financial Services, there's a law. It's part of 500, right? That says financial institutions and financial companies have to have certain covered entities in order to be, uh, to do their work, to do their to be put in place. But on the flip side, it
Yeah,
can be
and they
extremely
recently updated those to make them
yes.
tougher.
And on the flip side, it can be extremely expensive to implement these. So, how do you get started? And should they be in place? Yeah, I think so. But putting them in place can be extremely cost preventative or exhaustive. And then one of my neighbors actually works for a New York State um, auditing organization and has to do with financial. And he's telling me they're hiring more people to start auditing more companies. So I guess we should be thankful that our local, state, and federal um, bodies are putting things in place or putting laws in place that protect us as consumers and making sure those corporations do adhere. But at the same time, it can also prevent growth and people forming companies. And here's the thing that you and I have been
Well,
involved right with cybersecurity insurance. How expensive is it? And are some cybersecurity companies not even insuring people anymore or organizations? Right?
well, they're not insuring people because they've.
Well, you know what I
It's
meant.
been
I meant
much. It's been
organizations.
much tougher to get cyber insurance lately in the past year or so. Basically, because they've been paying out too much,
Yep.
and they've been losing money, which is a whole long topic. But talking about the regulatory side of things, there are a lot of people who've said, "Oh yeah, these regulations are great. We need more regulations." And New York and California have been leading it, but you got to remember with things. This is the in the real world. How do these things play out? Say, oh, it's wonderful. The government is going to put out all these guidelines or all these requirements, and companies got to follow them, and everything's going to be wonderful. Well, maybe we need to think a little deeper and say these guidelines that they're putting out, are they effective? Do they make sense? Very often the people writing these, strangely, it sounds ridiculous, but many of these people are not actually security people. And they're not even always risk management people. And they will put things in that are not necessarily wrong, but that are a little out of date and that are maybe not effective. And it's very, very difficult to build something that's, one size fits all, because organizations are very different.
So, and that goes back to, again, everything is round robin, right? If there is a breach and you get sued either by the stockholders or public or government organizations, directors and officers could be held personally liable for cybersecurity breaches depending on where the organization is. And I'm reading about one case in 2016 with Yahoo. The plaintiffs won a settlement of $29 million in a lawsuit. So how do you prove that you went far enough if there's no regulatory requirements and something gets breached? I mean, like, what happens if you have a person working for you and they go into, one of your cloud providers and by mistakes changes the permissions? So now a bucket or a folder is accessible from the internet with personal identifiable information. How do you handle that? So you already had the technology in place, but somebody made an error themselves in how they configured it. So now it's not even a technology issue as much as it is maybe a training or policy or procedure issue. Should somebody have double checked that person? Is there a procedure in place to do that? Was it followed? Sometimes these
Well,
things can be very extensive.
well, that's it. And what we're really getting into here that everyone knows is risk. That everyone should know is risk management. And when you're doing all these things, what Adam was talking about there was, okay, what a lot of audits will look at and what a lot of these regulations will say is you need these controls, like you need passwords to be this strong, and you need everyone to have their own account and stuff like that. So you're supposed to have these controls, and they will do some testing perhaps. And testing means going and looking at your logs, looking at your documentation, and hearing from you, and saying like, okay, you're doing what you should be doing. You say you're doing what you should be doing. You've got some evidence that you're doing it well, and maybe you've got some evidence that it's effective, which, like I say, to varying degrees. Maybe it's there, maybe it isn't. But say you have all those things, and you can say, yes, I have an effective control. But remember, that doesn't mean you have a perfect control. And
Exactly.
we've talked about this before. When you get things, it's easy to say, yes, we'll do this, yes, we'll do this. But when you start getting to scale, where you have not some people doing things, but hundreds, thousands of people doing things, getting people to do it the right way every time, and having controls in to check them and do it, very difficult. When the complexity gets very great, when there are so many things to check and they're interrelated and overlapping, becomes very, very challenging. And that's another thing I want to get into with the whole breach thing is, just because a company doesn't get, or just because a company gets breached, doesn't actually mean they're doing a bad job in security. You're looking at one data point in a sense. Very, very often, good companies, or I shouldn't say good companies with good security programs, run by competent people, do get breached, because there's always risk. You cannot eliminate the risk, and you can't eliminate the risk. And even if you're doing what you need to be doing in risk management and saying, you know what, here's what's important to the business, even if, say, we care about our customers, we have this data, we're storing it in these places, here are the right set of controls to protect it. We're using this kind of encryption, we're using these kinds of accounts, we're using this type of multi-factor, we're doing all these things. They're the things that we should be doing. And we're going to go a little bit beyond that.
So
even those companies
yeah.
get breached.
So we touched upon, legislation, which is usually more around sometimes civil lawsuits. But what about criminal lawsuits? So I'm sitting here Googling, and I'm like, has anybody ever been arrested over data theft? And I'm not going to tell you I read the whole article, because I haven't. But the title of the article is Election Software CEO Arrested Over Suspected Poll Worker Data Theft. The head of Conec has been accused of mishandling poll workers' personal information and violating the company's contract with LA County. So I'm sure there's a deeper investigation in there, and I'm not trying to, make doom and gloom. Huh?
That is kind of unusual. I mean,
yes, it is, absolutely.
Unless he was deliberately acting as a threat actor and taking the data, intending to use it maliciously. Someone being, as far as I know, and I'm not a lawyer, far from it, but someone being, prosecuted for mishandling data or not protecting it is a little unusual in our world. And I can tell you too, as a security manager, as a security exec, that's scary, because again, even people who do everything right still get breached. I've said it before. There are some really creative crooks out there.
It looks like he was charged with conspiracy to embezzle public funds and grand theft by embezzlement of public funds. And what he did allegedly, I haven't followed the whole thing, alleges that giving contracts in China access to sensitive data on election workers. So that's a little bit.
It sounds like he was acting as a deliberate threat actor. He was a deliberate threat actor, yeah.
But I thought it was a good point. I mean, again, I'm not saying that this is coming to a theater near you where, if you, misconfigure something or don't do everything that you're supposed to do, that you're going to be arrested. But I think the purpose of some of the legislation coming out is if you don't act what a comparable other either chief privacy officer or chief risk officer or CEO or somebody in that capacity would do, then I guess it's kind of a negligence. And I'm sure that's what they're looking to do from what I'm Googling right now.
Well, look, a lot of these regulations, they're still, they're in there's stuff that's been around for a while, but they're developing, especially as more breaches happen. But here's another thing to throw in there. There is a huge shortage of security people at all levels, from entry level up to the top. And, we're talking about the New York DIFUS and New York Department of Financial Services. It's knife, whatever it is. Anyway, their thing is, one of the new things is they say you must have a person responsible for information security. You need a chief security officer or a director of security or head, whatever. You need someone in charge. So now all these financial institutions, they say, okay, we got to get someone who's in charge. And if you go to LinkedIn, you'll see all sorts of job postings for this stuff. You know what? There actually aren't that many people who are qualified to do that and who do it well. And that's a struggle too.
So check this out. We're talking about Uber, right? Uber Chief Security Officer Joseph Sullivan guilty of not disclosing a 2016 breach of customer and driver records to regulators and attempting to cover up the incident. Sullivan has been convicted on 2 counts, one for obstructing justice but not reporting the incident, and another for misprison. So I guess, if you knowingly know something and you don't disclose it, then there's a chance you're going to go to jail.
Well, the Uber one is really complicated.
Yes, it is. They're all complicated.
I'm not super familiar with it. I know it is very. It's very controversial in a lot of ways. It's probably too complicated to get into right here. We could do a whole show on it because it's the Uber case. I mean, really briefly, it's a mix of ethical issues and public relations and trying to defend the company, and some people who maybe made some bad judgment calls, but was it criminal necessarily? That is a really, really deep topic that we should probably do something on at some point. But this stuff is tough, and but I guess the upshot too is like you're an Uber customer, so what should you think? Because virtually everyone is using Uber these days, at least here, here in near cities and in metro areas and stuff. Should you? And they got a lot of sensitive data. I mean, they know where you are, they know where you're going. They obviously have payment information and stuff. They've got a lot of stuff.
Especially if they get subpoenaed, right?
Should you trust them? Are they a company that's been burned so badly that they're doing a great job now? To be honest, I mean, I haven't really looked at it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I just know that this is, even though cybersecurity has been around quite a long time, longer than people realize, and even though it's been even more concentrated over the last 10 years in more as a discipline, because people before cybersecurity, we started looking at more about system security and network security, and that in itself has become an overarching organization for cybersecurity. And then cybersecurity encompasses not only network security and system security, but sometimes even physical security, and it starts blending together. But I think this is only the beginning. And especially now with all these crazy tools that are coming out, even ChatGPT and Bard and all these AI emulators, you can do a lot of really crazy things and step up your game to compromising people and organizations. So I think this is still only the beginning, even though it's been around at least 10 years in a concentrated form.
Well, look, here's the funny thing. You're right. Security's been around for a long time now, and it's been around as a discipline for a bit. And there are best practices and all these things. But you know what? It's still hard. Breaches are still happening, and it's not for lack of spending money. I mean, we're spending billions on it. It's really, really tough. It's funny. So people have said to me, they go, "Hey, Joe, you're in security, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." They go, "Hey, if I want to start a security company, how can I make a lot of money? But what's a $1 billion security product?" And I say, "I'll tell you what a $1 billion security product is. One that works, and one that works all the time." And it's a little glib, but it's like one that works all the time, that consistently does what it says it does, and that's not easy. That's hard to misconfigure, and that doesn't need constant care and feeding. That just works like a light bulb. You turn it on and it's on. That's the holy grail, and we are far from that.
Absolutely. So the other day I'm sitting on my couch and I watched War Games. So that movie came out in 1983. They say cybersecurity first emerged in 1987. Around that time, does anybody really know for sure? No, but can you imagine that?
That's not true. I mean, there's been cybersecurity since the 70s, possibly even in the 60s.
Oh, I'm
too.
sure.
Not what we would recognize as it today, but
well,
more or less the
1970s
same
was
thing.
ARPANET, right? ARPANET was the beginning of the connectivity between government organizations. So I'm sure there was some type of cybersecurity that evolved there with the Advanced Research Projects Agency network. But I'm saying that one site claims it became a little bit more formal in in the 1980s. But that's when the first commercial antivirus came out, also as well. So yeah, it's been around a while, but people are starting to understand it now because a lot of us did not have access to the internet. If you went to a college or a university, then you might have had access to the internet. Maybe 20 something years ago, 25 years ago. I don't know the exact amount. When did AOL come out? Let's see.
In
AOL
the late 80s, I suppose.
1985. So
But,
yes.
well, AOL. Well, it's funny. AOL actually started out as, I think, strictly a dial-up service, like a
Yes.
walled garden, and then they added the internet,
Yes.
and that's when things got real interesting.
Yep. So they saying that the internet age, according to Wikipedia, was 1991 to 2006. But we know cybersecurity has been around longer than that.
Yes, it has, but but it is fair to say that with the emergence of the internet, a lot of the things that we're dealing with now came out. A lot of the older principles. I mean, it may sound kind of funny, but like in the old days when even, like I said, going back to the 60s, when there were mainframes had security systems, actually pretty good ones that were effective for the time, very effective. But also those systems, in terms of what they did, were much, much simpler. And,
So that means
and you
that
couldn't
you and
get
I
into
are,
them from anywhere in the world.
so you and I are OG again, right?
Well, you know what? I have used a mainframe. I never really did any IT stuff, but I have used email on a mainframe from way back.
I heard you use
No punch.
I heard you
No,
use
I have
punch
not.
cards when it first came out.
I have not used punch cards. I'm not quite that far back, but I have done the what do you call? I've used a mainframe. Believe it or not.
Yeah, punch cards I believe were originally used for the census. They say the punch cards date back to the late 18th and 19th centuries, and when they used a program cloth making machine and looms. Can we say cybersecurity started back then if those machines were networked somehow? I'm being funny.
Well, I think some of those machines were programmable in a sense. That's where they get that from, but they were not computing devices necessarily. Anyway, okay. We are getting to the end as always. Last call. Other thoughts. Another huge topic. Like I say, we tossed out about 5 things here that we could probably do a session on each of them. Just with that.
Are you asking me the next topic?
No, I'm asking you. What are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are,
Are you having turkey for dinner tonight? I don't know.
No, there's no turkeys walking down my block. But I think we should do an episode totally about how to protect and protect ourselves against people eavesdropping on semaphores. Because semaphores can be really dangerous. When you're using those flags, if somebody else can see it, your data is getting absolutely compromised. Or am I going a little bit too far back?
I think you're going a little bit too far back to the point where you got to explain to people what semaphores are. You're talking about someone with the flag standing on top of a mountain sending messages. Yeah, not the most secure communication. Not very effective
okay.
either.
So let me take it back to present day. My final thoughts are: there are times when you have to be very careful utilizing organizations that have already been compromised. But do your due diligence. See whether or not those organizations have additional methods in place to protect you, and whether you were completely protected by using all the measures that were in place already. If your data was compromised by a back end, and then if you don't feel comfortable with them and you have the opportunity to switch organizations, before you switch, make sure that organization is protected as well. But don't get dismayed if you move to another organization, let's say a financial, and then they get compromised too, you just got to do the best you can. As long as you've done as much as you can to protect yourself as an individual, there's not much more you can do. Just make smart choices, and I think you should be okay.
Yeah, well, that's it. As the unfortunate news, I don't like to end on a downer, even though I can say let's do some shots after this. But these breaches and these things will continue. The state of the art right now is not sufficient to stem the flow of all of this. People like us are working on it hard, very hard, but it's a very, very difficult and a very complex problem, and we are fighting against some very clever and very determined adversaries, but we will beat them at some point.
And the last thing I want to bring up about the final closing on this topic is you have to make sure that the organization that you're utilizing for whatever means it is, whether it's financial or medical, you have to make sure that they have an experienced team of individuals who have that long-standing experience in protecting that infrastructure. And you might say to yourself, okay, I don't know how to look up the employees. You don't have to look up the employees. A lot of times these sites have who the board members are and what they have done and, how they've contributed to the trade. Take a look. It might make you feel better. It might not. But at least you did your due diligence.
That is true. There's only so much you can do. Okay. We are going to sign off. Adam, I have one final note.
Okay.
We have been talking about how we would love to hear from people, and we have a feedback address now. If we'll put it in the description, but if you email feedback@securitycocktailhour.com, you can talk to us, and we'll actually talk back.
I don't like to talk
clean
back.
Language, preferably. well, you can talk back to the listeners. Don't talk back to me. I'll
yes,
smack
sir.
you around.
Sorry, sir.
All right. That's it for now. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.